Tim, as we head into this weekend, I know we're getting closer and closer to signing day here. I know this is obviously last home game for Nebraska, so it's kind of a big push here. We talked last week about some potential flips. How are you looking at this last, what are we at, 2 weeks now before signing day?
Yeah, I think this last visit weekend is crucial. Like I just put up the visit preview for guys that are expected in town, and I could still see a name or two being added potentially. Just depending on who actually shows up tomorrow. At the same time, I think some names on the list right now might not show up. We're talking flips. Aiden Manitai, the safety from Hawaii. Nebraska's hoping to have him in town, either starting today or tomorrow for the weekend. But Cal's making a push because Cal's trying to keep their class together. So it's kind of like a wait and see type thing with him of does he actually make it into town? Cal has a pretty legit quarterback of their own in the 2025 class. They're trying to hold on to with Oregon and Georgia pushing. They've got him coming into town. He's from Hawaii. Aiden actually just beat his team in the playoffs. And so there's a chance Aiden just goes with a guy from the island back to the school he's committed to rather than Nebraska. So that's one to keep an eye on this weekend. The other one's Jeremiah Jones. Nebraska's hoping to get him back in town this weekend as they're battling Mizzou for his commitment. Mizzou has made a big push there this fall. They've had him on campus 3 times this over the last few weeks or the last few months actually. They had him at the end of July. They brought him in for an unofficial visit in like September. They had him on an official visit earlier this month. So Mizzou's the school to watch there. They're the ones that they feel confident on there that they're going to pull off the flip. But Nebraska's supposed to bring them into town this weekend. Again, but what we're hearing is Mizzou's going to try and prevent that from happening. And so if he doesn't make it into town, I think writing's on the wall. He's going to end up at Mizzou. But if he makes it into town, I think Nebraska's got a real good shot of potentially calming that water and holding on to his commitment.
Tim, is all of this, and I'm not blaming you here, but it all sounds very dramatic when it's like, man, like Mizzou's trying to keep this guy from going on a visit. Like I have visions of DeAndre Jordan getting isolated in his house with trying to get him to sign in Houston or whatever. Like I get these very dramatic, like spy thriller ideas in my head. Like when you're saying, hey, they're trying to make sure Jeremiah Jones doesn't get to Nebraska, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's just communicating of like, hey, like we want you, like this is the reason why, like, we talked about this on the official visit, like this is why you should come here. Don't take this visit. I'm sure there's some NIL benefits involved too of some like, hey, don't take the visit. We'll throw a little something. You know what I mean? Like that happens. That's just like kind of the world we're in now.
Yeah. Hey, what do you think happens with Mills?
We'll see. I think he ends up in the class. I think Oklahoma. I mean, last night they lost their quarterback in the 2025 class. I think they're going to see a couple other losses here in the cycle. Their lone 5-star offensive tackle commits visiting Texas this weekend. A&M's trying to make a late run there too. So I think Oklahoma's kind of in this weird position where they kind of have to move quick on their own offensive coordinator vacancy to try and calm some of their waters because a lot's up in the air. Their O-line coach, their wide receivers coach. I think the big thing with Mills is going to be what happens with Emmett Jones. Right now, I think the belief around Norman is it's not necessarily a guarantee that whoever the new OC is, Emmett Jones remains the wide receivers coach. I personally think that's a mistake. I think Emmett Jones is a good receiver and a good developer and has had a bad stretch of just injury luck this year. But if they lose Emmett Jones, I think Cortez Mills ends up signing with Nebraska. But I also believe that's a recruitment where he's the type of kid, and not just it's not on him, it's more so his recruitment. You could see a Clemson swoop in late. You could see a Florida swoop in late. Florida's getting pretty aggressive here with NIL here at the end of the cycle. We could see a couple teams kind of swoop in late, especially if Nebraska doesn't take care of business and get that 6th win.
Yeah, Tim, how is Oklahoma trying to blame this on on the wide receiver coach when their top 6 guys are hurt?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the receiver. It's just like for them, it's like they need a change of. They feel like they need a complete change at the offensive side of the ball, and I just don't think that's the case. I think the position coaches are quality. I like Emmett Jones. I like Bill Bedenbaugh. I think Bill Bedenbaugh is one of the better O-line coaches in the country. I think his history speaks for itself. His evaluations, his development speaks for itself. And the fact that it's even like a conversation at this point that those guys might not be around next year, I think it's a little silly and a bit overreactionary to just a poor year in terms of injury luck on the offensive side of the ball.
Tim, you had a ton of questions in the mailbag about the secondary. Ravi and I have been talking about Coach Butler last night and kind of this premise that, hey, are we doing too much? Is this not enough? Do we want to be able to check in and out of things? Is it safe to say that, like, when you look at the secondary, has this been the biggest head scratcher for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the inability for the front end and the back end of the defense to be on the same page consistently. I thought that was something that might figure itself out over the course of the season. I also didn't expect it to be as much of an issue. I kind of thought with how late Butler got into the program and into the system, I thought it would be like, okay, Tony's communicating everything for the defense this fall and it's going to be all under Tony, but it very much feels like the front end of the defense and the secondary is segmented based on what John wants the back end to do and what Tony and Rob and Knighton want the front to do. And so, yeah, that's been a little bit of a head scratcher. I mean, what's not been confusing for me at all is why they're struggling, though. Like, it feels pretty obvious that they have an athleticism deficit back there. And Rhule has tried to address that by bringing in really good athletes, uber athletes, I would even argue, and a mix of good football players and good athletes. But most all of those guys need development, and this wasn't the year for those guys to kind of step into bigger roles. And so you're seeing, like Jeremiah Charles is getting thrown into action, an elite athlete by every stretch of like what by the word means. He's elite, but he's not a football. Like he hasn't played a whole lot of football of snaps, a whole lot of snaps at cornerback. So it's a guy that probably needs another offseason, maybe even another season in like a reserve role before he's ready for starting minutes. In the back end, you're playing Gifford and Singleton out there because those are the guys with the most experience, some best communicators, and do provide you a burst in certain situations. But when you face the USC types, when you face the Ohio State types, when you face these teams with elite athletes and receivers and you need guys to win one-on-one matchups, those aren't the guys that can do that. You have those guys hypothetically in on the depth chart, like somewhere in there. Those guys just aren't ready to play football at the Big Ten level just yet.
All right, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this because he talked about Coach Butler talked last night about coaching older guys in the NFL versus younger guys and kind of the transition of what's too much. Give me your thoughts on this clip right here.
No, I would say that would be the biggest difference. It's you're just when you're coaching a college kid versus coaching an NFL player for me for 10 years, there's an adjustment that's required in my brain. Just there's certain things that they're capable of at this level and there's certain expectations that I'm not saying you lower the expectations, but they just are not as experienced. And when you're coaching a 32-year-old Micah Hyde versus a 18-year-old Caleb Benning, that's 14-year difference in not only life experience but football experience. So you just have to understand. And I've had some good conversations with Matt about that. Matt's been great, and he's like, "Hey, John, you got to readjust your eyes a little bit and understand that don't ever lower your expectations, but there's a certain level of development that you've just got to keep focusing on and take the small victories, because I think we have a good core group of young players that now that I've been here, what has it been 4 months, I see the development now where initially I was like, oh, okay, we got a long way to go."
Yeah, so obviously that piques my interest because I'm like, yeah, like that. And I know what Coach Rhule would say on the alternative. How important is it that you think those guys understand getting on the same page of risk reward is something that as a hurdle that the staff in terms of continuity has to get over as well?
Yeah, it's I mean, I agree, but that's the statement overall of just like, hey, as a coach and going from the NFL down to college, you do have to kind of shrink things down a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there's an element too of and Damon, I'm sure you can speak to this too, of like cornerbacks at this age, like kind of are going for the big play rather than the safe play. And you saw it with, I think, again, a good example, Malcolm Hartzog last week. Again, like that's a busted assignment, and he was kind of put in a bad position. But when you're in that position, sing towards the receiver and then high point the ball. Don't do it in such a case where you're jumping up or like again, it's more of that case of like as a young DB, there are times where you see guys kind of get greedy and try to jump routes, and it's like you're saying, that high risk, high reward. They try to jump routes, and if they miss it, it's a wide open touchdown, or it's a busted coverage. I just think, I think it's going to take some time, but I mean, I'm of the belief, I was talking to Steve about this week. I'm of the belief that I think the secondary is going to look a lot better by the end of this spring than it does right now, just because I think a full offseason with Butler, getting his verbiage in there, getting his coaching tools in there, is really going to help the secondary out a lot. And I think they're going to be aggressive in the portal about getting some difference makers in the back end too.
We're talking with Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. Tim, when you hear Coach Rhule say, hey, when we're playing cover 2, we just need our guy to make sure he's playing cover 2. When we're playing cover 3, we need to make sure he's not getting beat deep, because that's his job as the deep cover on that one. Like, when you hear that, to me it sounds like, hey, the guys we have in there are not doing the basic things. And I guess my question is, in your mind, what value is the experienced guys if they're not doing the basic things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, it's been, for the most part, they've been playing the right assignment. It's just they have a handful of busted coverages, and those are some of the big gashing plays that hurt Nebraska last Saturday, and it's hurt Nebraska across the course of the season. I mean, you look at the Tommy Hill stats of just like when he's been thrown at this year, and it's like, that guy's been injured, and you can question why has he been out there and why they keep trotting him out there when he's been injured as much as he has. But you're not wrong. Like, again, I do believe at a certain extent, it's like guys got to make plays. But then you see, hey, they put Jeremiah Charles out there against UCLA. That first drive, he's the one that's getting picked on the entire first drive. So it's not like the guys behind them are necessarily ready just yet. I think they will be. I just think they're just young.
So on a national level, TV level of surprise with what Bryce Underwood decided, and does Juju going to Colorado give you any kind of inkling on the national level of what either one of those schools, Colorado or Michigan, will be capable of as they finish the tail end of this recruiting cycle?
Yeah, I mean, Bryce is massive, obviously, and I think a lot's been talked about with the NIL situation there. It's like, LSU didn't necessarily put up a competitive offer back up, but this from people I've talked to doesn't sound like it came down solely to NIL. I think Bryce is a smart kid. I think he has an idea of what they're doing there, and Bryce is, in my opinion, one of the better high school the top 2 in this class, specifically him and Tavian St. Clair, are 2 of the better quarterbacks we've seen in a couple of cycles, and that includes Dylan. Like, I think Bryce is one of the better guys we've seen. I think, like, I'm going to say Trevor Lawrence, but I think it's a guy sooner than that. But Bryce is the best we've seen in a good bit, and I think he's a guy that's going to step in and have those reins pretty early, just because his dual threat ability, his control in the pocket, and the athletic upside with him. I think the sky's the limit for him, and I do think that Michigan team, it just really depends on how they continue to build, because they lose a lot off that defense. You lose Colston Loveland. I think they're going to get aggressive here in the portal and in the end of this high school cycle, and trying to replenish some of that talent. They've got good depth. It's just the top end of that talent isn't what it used to be. So I'm curious to see how they surround Bryce. Juju on that end, I mean, man, just like credit to Dion and credit to that staff for what they've done this year, because I didn't see this. I kind of thought this was going to be a year where they do what they did last year, maybe show a little improvement. I thought there was a chance they make a bowl game. I didn't expect this, where they have a chance to win the conference and make the playoff. But yeah, it sounds like Dion's staying around. He's got a good group of weapons coming in. I wonder about the long-term tenability of that situation. Like, you look at what happened to Florida State this year. I kind of think Colorado's in for one of those years, if not this year, next year, or if not next year, the year after, just because at some point you do lose so much. You have so much turnover and you lose so much, where it's like next year you're losing Shedeur, Travis, and a whole bunch off that defense. Like, I think they're in for a bit of a regression at some point, but I mean, the way they're keeping the train on the tracks is really impressive. Like, landing Juju, that's no small feat. And I know there was a lot of like, hey, this feels like something that was ultimately coming. But Indiana made a big push. USC did fight to keep him in the class. And Juju took this process very seriously. He wouldn't have committed if he didn't think, one, that Dion was sticking around, or two, that Dion didn't have a plan for him.
Hey, let me ask you something. I was going to transition to Wisconsin real quick, but let me take advantage of your recruiting eye. when you look at what Nebraska's got in the class, you and I talked last week about, because I have an affinity for Dvorak and kind of what he's been able to do, and this will be the first time, I think, in his tenure with guys like Shavers and McGahee, and he's got Muberry, Jones, and Merritt in this class. When you look at those three guys in this 2025 class, how do you kind of slot them in terms of maybe not top to bottom, but skill sets as you see them working their way into the second level at Nebraska?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think Christian Jones is a future, like the strong side backer, maybe even the jack. Like I think he's a guy that can play jack or play strong side. I think Dawson is a guy that's probably going to play weak side, with every now and then have an opportunity to kind of creep up and blitz. Pierce, I don't know where you put Pierce. I wouldn't lie to you. That's one where I think some of his better skills. He's got the length to play jack, but he's not, like, the passer skills aren't on tape like they are with Christian Jones and Dawson Merritt. Dawson, we've seen him brush the passer. With me, it's just like he's 6'2", about 210 pounds. Like I think he's going to be limited size wise. So I think he's a guy that's better out in space, and I think he's best at weak side backer. I think Christian's best at strong side, but has some pass rush ability. We've seen him play for y'all at outside linebacker. I think he can do some of that jack stuff. Pierce, I think, is best at weak side as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if they rotate him a bit around and use him like they use
because
Javen
his frame is the biggest, or
yes, I think the frame
frame
and also his ability to kind of like float in coverage. I think he does a really, really good job of sinking in coverage, and he's really natural kind of passing things along. I noticed that in 7-on-7 and noticed it again this season. Like he's just really natural in coverage.
Pierce is probably too big to stay at safety long term, but like how much of an advantage is having somebody that is that good in coverage and kind of has that safety background? I mean, is that, are we looking like sort of like a John Bullock situation there where he's got some of those cover skills coming from safety?
Different frames.
Yeah, different body types.
Yeah, different frames, and I think what they're going to be asked to do is going to be different, if y'all agree. Like I think in the Big Ten, I think you have Pierce on tight ends and running backs, and you have Bullock on like slot receivers and running backs.
Let me ask you something here. Of the three things that I'm kind of pulling away from Wisconsin getting ready for tomorrow, they don't give up sacks, so getting after the passer will be something. They have been a little leaky stopping the run. That's another component. And Locke has thrown an interception in every game he's played. Of those three things, those three indicators, which one do you think will be the most determinant of the outcome tomorrow?
I think the running game. I think if Nebraska can get that going, I think they'll have an opportunity, because I think tomorrow is the type of day where you force them to crowd the box and you try to win some one-on-one matchups, because you're going to have those opportunities. Unlike USC, I think you have an athletic advantage on the perimeter with some one-on-one matchups. And I think if this staff is who they say they are, and I think it's an opportunity for Dana Holgorsen to kind of encourage the fan base that this is an offense that can run the ball, that he's going to be willing to run the ball. I think Wisconsin, like you're saying, they are leaky, and I think Nebraska, if they're healthy, has the capability to kind of run the ball on them. I think that's the most important thing tomorrow. I do think pressure. We saw that against USC too. I think Nebraska is going to be able to get pressure on Locke. Will they be able to get home?
Pretty good against in pass pro.
For sure, and that's the thing. They may be able to to pressure him and force some quick throws. I don't know if they get home at all. Like I'll say this, I wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska finishes the day with 0 sacks. Like you said, Wisconsin's O-line's done a good job. I just think Nebraska tomorrow, I think their wins and their plays behind the line of scrimmage are going to have to come in the run game.
That's our guy Tim Verghese inside Nebraska. Tim, we appreciate it as always. Have a good weekend.